Welcome back to Combat Mission Battle for Normandy and the third mission of the Scottish Corridor campaign. In the last mission, a couple of platoons from D Company helped clear some of the road to Chew to the northwest. It's now just past 9 o'clock in the evening and the Germans are putting a counterattack in on the Cameronians' position at Haut Bosq that we took in the morning. This is the last gasp before nightfall. There's less than an hour of light left, and it's going to be difficult to reorganise an attack or counterattack after dark, so whoever's standing on Haut Bosq at the end of this battle is going to own it until the next day. There are two objectives to hold on to: Hansel and Gretel, two small farm complexes on the south side of the village. These are both worth 100 victory points, then there's another 200 for destroying the enemy, and the usual 100-point bonus for keeping casualties below 20%. C Company is dug in around the village, with one section from 13 platoon stationed forward as a tripwire, and has been fully re-ammunitioned and brought back up to full strength since the attack this morning, presumably by folding in elements of A and B companies who were roughly handled before they even got close. The company is also being reinforced by two 6-pounder anti-tank guns and their vehicles, and a 3-vehicle scout section in carriers, both from the battalion support company. On top of this, two 2-tube sections of the battalion 3-inch mortars will be coming online in 10 minutes. At the 25-minute mark, D Company's 18 platoon will arrive, followed at 30 minutes by a troop of Shermans from the 5 and 45 Yeomanry, consisting of two Sherman 2s and a Sherman 5C Firefly with the 17-pounder, plus a battery of 4 25-pounders. These times are all approximate, but by the halfway point here I should have a pretty substantial combined arms force. The Germans are reportedly attacking in at least company strength, with their infantry being supported by a small number of Tiger tanks and light armoured vehicles. We had a bit of Tiger psychosis in the last mission, so it remains to be seen whether the Germans are going to roll up with an actual Mark 6 or whether these are misreported Panzer IVs. Just before the mission starts, a runner from 13 Platoon's outpost has arrived at Company HQ, saying that they can hear tanks off to the southwest. That tripwire position is on the crest of the gentle slope that runs down to the village, behind some low bocage in the orchard that is the enemy's most likely avenue of attack on the left. Pushing down here, they can avoid the open fields on either side and get to a good fire support position only 150 metres away from the Hansel objective. The early warning I'm getting from one section 13 platoon, who are acting as the outpost up there, is critical, but at the same time the rest of my force down in the village can't support them, and if they get into a fight, they're on their own. So the first thing I want to do is pull that section out, back down through the orchard to Hansel. I'm not totally abandoning the orchard. I've left a detached 2-man stay-behind team to maintain at least some eyes and ears over the crest, and I've brought 2 of the scout sections in their carriers up to the bottom of the orchard to try and delay anything attempting to push through. What the enemy is going to do over here is going to have to wait a little though. He's opening the battle with a Nobelwerfer barrage on my right. This is not unexpected. The briefing has warned that they found this going, henceforth badly translated to Stork Farm, so I don't have to try and say that again, is a death trap because the Germans have spent the afternoon registering their artillery on it. This is worrying because the enemy has good access to it across the fields via a track, and they have a covered approach through the farm itself onto the flank of Gretel and onto the main road running behind both objectives. The terrain in there is dense and tight, exactly the kind of terrain that seemed to favour the heavily armed, highly motivated Germans in the last mission. I daren't try and deploy into Stork Farm itself, which, judging by the preparatory Nobelwerfer fire, was a pretty good move, so I've strong pointed 15 platoon into the left side of Gretel, with an eye to hitting the Germans as they approach the farm and then delaying them as they try to exploit that position. The troops in the Gretel strongpoint should be able to hit the enemy in the flank and potentially enfilade them down the edge of the Stork Farm orchard as they advance, as should some troops and one of the 6-pounders that I've set up in another strongpoint on the Hansel objective. If they really try and exploit the right, I have 14 platoon in reserve at the Neeps farm with the other 6-pounder. I don't expect to really be able to stop the enemy if he attacks via Stork Farm, but I do think I have a good chance of delaying and fix him in place for the concentrated firepower of the mortars and the 25-pounders to destroy him. That's the worst case scenario. If the Germans' main effort is via the orchard on the right or the fields in the centre, I have two mutually supporting strongpoints and a relatively safe run up and down the back line of my defence that the company FO can use to get into position to organise that killing blow from the artillery. The Nobelwerfers cause a handful of casualties and plenty of suppression, but there's no sign of any enemy advance in tight coordination with them. Instead, the Germans are pressing the orchard. The detached scouts from 13 sections bug out under fire, heading down through the trees to join the battalion scouts and their carriers. Enemy infantry are popping up at the far end of the orchard, but what's more concerning is a pair of potential tank sound contacts in the sunken road at the crest of the hill. These could well be a problem for the scouts. Bren carriers don't react well to anything nastier than small arms fire, but as I'm deliberating whether to pull them out, the nearest sound contact rolls down the track towards Hansel. The scouts catch a glimpse of it, and this time it is a tiger. The carrier that spots it immediately reverses with the Bren gunner in the back, encouraging the German tank commander to get his head down. This is not good news. I do have some anti-tank assets down at Hansel, but they're not exactly well deployed to deal with something like a heavy tank coming straight at them. 13 platoons Piat can get up to the barrage at the front of the objective, but the Tiger's going to have to come a lot closer for it to be effective, and it will probably be presenting its thick frontal armour, making a good penetration a lot less likely. The 6-pounder is set up in Hansel's little orchard, but would suffer from the same problems engaging the Tiger from the front, and right now I'm more concerned with using it to cover the approach to Stork Farm. That's not great, but I do have a somewhat riskier option up my sleeve. The battalion scouts are actually very heavily armed, and they carry a Piat in one of the carriers. Because I was thinking about potential enemy vehicles moving down that exact track when I deployed them, the scout team with the Piat is fortuitously in an almost perfect ambush position. The rest of the scout section has bugged out, and there are enemy infantry contacts advancing through the orchard, but the Tiger has already outpaced its infantry once and found itself without support. If I'm lucky, it might do so again. On the next turn, I am lucky. The Tiger pushes forward a little further and stops right next to the scouts. It's definitely seen something. The huge turret starts to swing around. One of the scouts gets a grenade on it, but the Piat gunner is busy engaging enemy infantry that have gotten a little close for comfort. On the next turn, he switches his attention, but he doesn't seem to be able to get a good line for the Piat. Instead, he gives the Tiger another grenade. It's not clear whether this is specifically an anti-tank grenade or combat mission abstracting infantry close assault, but whatever happens, in a panic, the crew bail, one being killed by another hand grenade, and they run off into the wheat. They get away because I put the scouts on a target armour arc to make sure they definitely engage the Tiger instead of the German infantry, who are now dangerously close. This almost spells disaster, but luckily one of the scout carriers is able to thread some Bren gunfire through the orchard and delay them long enough for the Piat scouts to escape. This is incredibly good news, and incredible luck, but as the scouts bug out, the Germans start to occupy the close edge of the orchard, a good fire support position, and a second tank contact resolves into another Tiger. This one is rolled into the wheat field in the centre of the map, where it starts firing at Gretel, but before spotting it I'd sent out a team from 13 platoon to try and get eyes on and finish off the bailed out crew of the first Tiger. They don't spot their intended target, but they are able to treat the second tank to a flurry of rifle fire that hits the exposed tank commander. The big tank pops smoke and reverses out of sight. It's still in the fight, but for now it's gone. Which is good news because over on the right flank by Gretel, everything has gone wrong. As the scouts were dealing with the first Tiger on the left, the Germans made their move on Stork Farm. I'd sent the company's sniper team up in a carrier to get some kind of early warning over there, and they're able to hear some light armour contacts on the edge of the orchard. 15 platoon in Gretel and the Hansel 6-pounder meanwhile can't see a thing. The combination of gathering darkness, the wheat and a slight slope means that they're really struggling to make spots on the Stork Farm approach. trying to sneak the snipers closer in, seems them run slap bang into at least a platoon's worth of Germans. Not only are they already all over the orchard and swinging towards Gretel, but the two light armour contacts with them resolve into gun half-tracks, a /10 with the 37mm gun, and a Stummel with the short 75. Out of range of 15 platoons Piet, out of sight of the Hansel 6-pounder, hard to spot in the half-life and fairly safe from small arms fire in their frontal arcs, the two German half-tracks are able to engage with impunity and go to work on the infantry fighting from Gretel's upper floors. To add to the misery, after only a few minutes, the Tiger reappears and joins in, giving the German infantry infiltrating Gretel from Stork Farm plenty of cover. Tracers crisscross the fields as German troops on the left at the base of the orchard start engaging 15 platoon in Gretel, and elements of 13 platoon at Hansel start engaging the enemy attacking from Stork Farm. The 6-pounder spots the Tiger and manages to ding some AP rounds off the frontal armour with no obvious effect, before being suppressed by the enemy in the orchard. It's getting darker all the time too, making spotting harder and harder, and making units that do open fire glaringly obvious targets. The 81s have arrived and start coming in, hounding the right side of Gretel, knocking down buildings and undoubtedly causing casualties, but by now the lead German elements have moved in close under the barrage. 15 platoon has been forced out at the edge of their strongpoint, and enemy infantry has reached their original positions. On the left, the German infantry at the orchard has taken advantage of the darkness to advance down the open field towards Hansel, where they get into a firefight with 13 platoon. We're back to the anemic firepower of the British infantry sections. They really need supporting arms to help them out, but they're not quite here yet. The Tiger, meanwhile, has driven right up in between the two objectives, right next to where I've relocated the 6-pounder to try and spot the /10 by Gretel. The 6-pounder spots the Tiger and manages to repeatedly miss, because of course it does, but 13 platoons Piet comes up alongside and puts a shot right into the side of the turret. It's not a full penetration, just a partial pen, but it freaks the tank crew out enough for them to turn tail and run again. A second Piet bomb smears itself on the rim of the cupola without doing any significant damage, but as the Tiger exposes its rear, the 6-pounder finally gets its act together and gets 2 rounds on target, one into the back of the turret and another into the left side. They're only partial pens, but with hits on 3 out of 4 sides, the inside of that turret has got to be an unhappy place right now. It's another little ray of sunshine that doesn't last. In the same turn, I've moved the scout carriers onto the flank of the German attack on Hansel, where they manage to put some fire in before one of them is collared by the 20mm cannon on an enemy armoured car. Over at Gretel, the Germans have total fire superiority on the edge of 15 platoon strongpoint and they're moving in. To cap it all off, the now incredibly angry Tiger comes back. It practically rolls into the Gretel courtyard right next to the building where 15 platoon's dead Piet team is, and blows away the last remaining intact unit I have in the objective. It doesn't get away with this unpunished. It's side on to the 6-pounder, which scores 2 full proper penetrations on the hull, but these don't appear to hit anything important inside the tank. Undeterred, it pushes back into the centre between Hansel and Gretel. Here it finds itself with the 6-pounder and 13 platoons Piet on one side, and 14 platoons Piet on the other, tucked into a corner of Gretel. 14 platoon is still in reserve at Neeps, where they can hopefully at least stop the German infantry on the right exploiting. Gretel is lost at this point, and there's no point counterattacking until reinforcements arrived, but they're also backed up by the second 6-pounder, which has freed their Piet team to go out tank hunting. The Tiger drives straight at them as the 6-pounder hits it in the rear, but 13 platoons Piet overshoots and hits the barn next to 14 platoons Piet, sending them to ground. The Tiger drives right on top of them, despite another penetration from the 6-pounder, and sends them running off in a panic. Then the tank corners the edge of Gretel and exposes itself to the second 6-pounder. This puts an AP round right through the front of the turret, then loses the spot. It regains it on the next turn when the Tiger decides it's had enough and needs to go back the way it came, and puts another 2 penetrations into the left hull. This at least prompts it to pop smoke again, which masks it from both AT guns and 13 platoons Piet as it pulls back to the field in front of Gretel. By all rights, the thing should be out of action, but obviously I used all my luck up on the first tiger. Losing Gretel is clearly not great, but it's certainly tolerable. I'm somewhat happy to swap one objective in exchange for the knowledge that there's a significant enemy concentration sitting on it that I can obliterate with the 25-pounders once they arrive. The situation at Hansel is a bit more worrying. German infantry make periodic attempts to storm it, but most of the defenders are tucked away into defilated flanking positions where they can gun them down in the courtyard. It's not all one way by any means. The 222 in particular manages to all but wipe out the one section I risked putting into a frontal position, but 13 Platoon doesn't have to hold on for much longer. Help is at hand. D Company's 18 Platoon has already arrived, and I've been moving them up on my left, ready to roll up the Hansel attack from the flank, and now the advertised troop of Shermans has entered the fray. The 222 is unceremoniously blown away as I direct one of the Sherman 75s to target the Germans in front of Hansel directly, while another moves up to join with 18 Platoons of flank attack. The enemy crumbles instantly under the barrage of 75mm HE and machine gun fire, but mopping them up in the dark proves tough. They simply don't seem to understand the concept of giving up, and even though there's just a handful of survivors, they invariably manage to inflict some casualties on 18 Platoon's probing teams before they can be snuffed out by concentrated firepower. Painful as it is, they are being mopped up though, and Hansel is essentially secure. There are still 15 minutes on the clock, plenty of time to get at least some men into the Gretel objective area to contest it and deny the Germans the points at the end. I'm not going in before the 25-pounders have finished though. The enemy at Gretel is sat on a huge X, and I drop the entire 140 round ammunition load of the artillery on it while I finish up at Hansel. The guns make a mess of the whole area, thoroughly chewing it up, and giving my forces some cover as they reorient to push on Gretel. The Tiger is still where it was last seen, leading me to probe in from the direction of Neeps to stay out of its line of sight. A scouting element from 14 Platoon runs into trouble as it approaches the barns from the road, revealing a German squad that is blown away by one of the supporting Shermans, along with what's left of the barn they're set up in. This apparently freaks the Stummel out, which has been hiding behind it, and it rolls out into full view of the Neep 6-pounder, which takes it out. A few turns later, as I'm still gathering the forces needed to push into Gretel and deal with the Tiger, the Germans surrender. That was a little unexpected, and I could certainly have inflicted some more pain on them in the last few minutes, but I'll take it. The surrender makes it a win by default, but it's been pretty costly on both sides. I've lost 43 men dead and 32 wounded, plus 2 Bren carriers. These losses are almost universally amongst the 2 forward platoons. Both the Hansel and Gretel strongpoints were worked over pretty well, whilst Neeps got away with very little attention and 18 Platoon was late to the party. The Germans, on the other hand, have lost 100 dead and 47 wounded, so almost 150 casualties, plus the first Tiger and 5 other vehicles. Of these, the FO accounted for 53 and the /10 half-track with a 37mm gun. And going back to check, these were almost all from the 25-pounder barrage at the end. This begs the question, was it worth duking it out with the Germans trying to hold on to Gretel? Even at the time it was fairly obvious that they were on top. Hitting them on the approach to Stork Farm simply didn't happen, and once they were there, the battle turned into a frontal engagement where they had superior firepower and, critically, the 37mm and the Stummel backing them up. In hindsight, once it was clear that it was an unfavourable engagement, it might have been better falling back, at least to the far side of the Gretel courtyard to mitigate the enemy's direct fire, and calling in the mortars much closer as a prelude to destruction via 25-pounder. Events over at Hansel somewhat demonstrate how effective that might have been. 13 Platoon's main source of casualties also came in frontal engagements where the Germans could bring their superior local firepower to bear. This was most obvious when the 222 basically deleted an entire section with 20mm HE fire, but when the Germans tried to enter the courtyard and were engaged by British infantry teams scattered around the edge, they didn't last very long. On the flip side, it's easy to make these decisions in hindsight, and while I was sure I wasn't in a good engagement at Gretel at the time, it wasn't clear whether hanging on to inflict extra casualties or maybe bag one of the half-tracks was going to pay off and change the dynamic. One thing that I wouldn't change in hindsight, though, is the anti-tank battle. This might sound weird given how much trouble the 2nd Tiger caused, but by all rights it should be out of action. There were only 2 crewmen left alive in it at the end of the battle, meaning they were sharing the interior with 3 dead or wounded buddies, and despite the armour it was starting to look like a colander. Granted, the multiple Piat and 6-pounder AP hits didn't manage to inflict any catastrophic damage, but I don't think I could have done that much more, and I don't think I could have asked the weapons teams to do much more. They got the hits in, they got the penetrations in. The letdown was a bit of bad luck in not hitting anything critical inside the tank, and the fact that the Tiger crew was insanely committed to attacking this village. Regardless, the Cameronians are sitting on Le Haut the Bosq at the end of the first day of Operation Epsom. The German counterattack has been a costly failure, and in the morning the attack is going to continue. It won't be continuing for the Cameronians though. In the next mission we're switching to the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders, who are going to try and exploit the first day's limited successes on a different axis. Hope you all enjoyed this one and found it interesting. I'll catch you in the next video.